My name is Lin Nguyen. I'm 31 years old, and if Paris gave me anything, it was discipline over my own face. I learned how to smile while bleeding. I arrived in Paris at 21 with a scholarship, one suitcase, and the heartbreak I pretended didn't matter. I spoke French like a child reciting memorized poetry, careful, stiff, terrified of mistakes. In my first seminar, the professor corrected my pronunciation 3 times in 5 minutes. The class laughed softly. I laughed too. Then I went home to my tiny studio apartment in the 5th arrondissement and practiced until my tongue ached. I recorded news broadcasts. I mimicked radio hosts. I stood in front of the mirror and argued with imaginary opponents in flawless French. By the end of my second year, no one corrected me anymore. By my third year, I was working part-time for a crisis management firm that specialized in reputation recovery for executives who had cheated, lied, or been caught stealing. My job wasn't to defend them. My job was to make them sound human. I ghost wrote apologies, redemption memoirs, interviews designed to soften public outrage. I sat across from powerful men who insisted they were victims of misunderstanding. I listened. I watched the way their fingers twitched when they lied, the way their voices tightened when they feared exposure. I learned the rhythm of deception. And I learned something more important. Even the most untouchable man has a breaking point. When I returned to New York at 25, I carried Paris inside me like a secret weapon. The accent was smooth now, the posture straighter, the smile deliberate. That was when I met Ethan Carter. He was magnetic in a room, tall, confident, always mid-sentence about some new investment round or tech breakthrough. At a mutual friend's rooftop party in Manhattan, he found me standing near the railing, watching the skyline. "You look like you're analyzing the structural integrity of the city," he joked. "Maybe I am," I replied lightly. He liked that answer. He liked that I laughed at his stories. He liked that I asked him to explain venture capital as if I had never negotiated a publishing contract in my life. He liked that I tilted my head and said, "Wow, that's impressive," when he described user acquisition metrics. He liked feeling smarter than me. At dinner 3 weeks later, he reached across the table and said, "You're different, Lin. You're not competitive." I smiled. "Is that good?" "It's refreshing." Ethan didn't fall in love with me. He fell in love with a version of himself he saw reflected in my silence, and I let him. At the time, I mistook his need for dominance as ambition. I told myself his control was just intensity. When he said, "You don't need to worry about the financial details," I heard protection. When he said, "Stay out of the business side, it's complicated," I nodded. Of course, I would say gently. We married within a year. The penthouse came next. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, marble counters, custom furniture, investors shaking his hand in our living room. His startup, privacy-first data applications he called them, grew fast. Media loved him. Panels invited him. Podcasts praised him. At home, though, the tone shifted. "You wouldn't understand," he would say, distracted, scrolling through his phone. I would set down his coffee carefully. "You're probably right." He never asked how I paid for my own car in cash. He never questioned the contracts wired quietly into my separate account. He never imagined that my freelance work, still ghostwriting, still shaping narratives for powerful men, earned more in a quarter than his salary. And he never wondered why I listened so closely when he took late-night calls behind closed doors. While he built his empire on privacy, I recognized the familiar cadence of concealment. The Gala at Le Bernardin was supposed to be his crowning moment, a partnership that would make him international, untouchable. That night, as I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my dress, Ethan walked behind me and said casually, "Just smile tonight. Let me handle the important conversations." I met his eyes in the reflection, and I smiled. He didn't realize that I have been handling important conversations my entire adult life. He didn't realize that in Paris I had learned how men fall. And he definitely didn't realize that tonight I was about to hear something he would regret for the rest of his life. The reservation was under his name, but the ending, that would be under mine. The private dining room at Le Bernardin glowed like a jewel box. Candlelight flickered against crystal glasses. White orchids curved elegantly across the center of the table. The air smelled of butter, truffle, and expensive wine, the kind of scent that whispers power without raising its voice. Across from us sat Monsieur Henri Duval, founder of Laurent Group. Silver hair brushed neatly back, impeccable suit, eyes that missed nothing. He had the stillness of a man who had survived wars in boardrooms and walked away richer every time. Ethan was electric beside me, confident, slightly too loud, slightly too eager. He loved rooms like this. "This partnership changes everything," he said, lifting his glass. "Transatlantic expansion, ethical innovation, a new era." Henri nodded slowly. "Innovation is only as strong as the foundation beneath it." Ethan smiled tightly, then leaned forward and switched to French. Bad French. "Ma femme est une idiote," he said with a small laugh, gesturing toward me like I was part of the table setting. Lente, une chercheuse d'or, elle ne comprend rien. My wife is an idiot, slow, a gold digger, she understands nothing. The words landed gently in the air, violently inside me. Henry's eyebrow rose just slightly. Elle ne parle pas français? Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Pas un mot. Elle ne comprend pas le business non plus. Après vendredi, je divorce. Elle part sans rien. Not a word. Doesn't understand business either. After Friday, I file for divorce. She leaves with nothing. My throat froze halfway to my mouth. I felt my pulse in my throat, in my wrists, in the space behind my eyes. But my face? Calm. I lowered the fork carefully and reached for my wine. A measured sip. A polite smile. Smile, Lynn. Always smile. Ethan leaned even closer to Henry, his voice dropping. Once you sign, assets move to Cayman Trust. Clean transfer. She gets zero. Henry's gaze shifted to me then. Slow. Assessing. I met his eyes briefly, offering nothing but soft indifference, as if I were merely admiring the candlelight. C'est risqué, Henry murmured. It's risky. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. Trust me. She's decorative. Decorative. The word slid under my skin like a blade. I dabbed my lips with a napkin. The sea bass is exquisite, I said lightly in English. You chose beautifully, Ethan. He smirked, satisfied. I know. Of course you do, I thought. They continued discussing projections, AI integration, data acquisition strategies. Ethan exaggerated confidently. Henry listened more than he spoke. Every syllable in French etched itself into my memory. Divorce by Friday, Cayman Trust, zero. By the time dessert arrived, dark chocolate with gold leaf, my heartbeat had steadied. Something inside me had shifted. Not broken, shifted. I watched Ethan laugh too loudly at something Henry said. I watched the way he leaned forward, desperate for approval. He thought he was in control. He thought I was powerless. He thought language was a weapon I didn't possess. As the check was discreetly handled and chairs slid back, Henry looked at me once more. There was curiosity in his eyes now. Not pity. Curiosity. Ethan placed his hand on my lower back, steering me toward the exit like an accessory. Outside, Manhattan glittered cold and indifferent. See, he said, smug. Big things are happening. I turned to him slowly. I can tell. 3 days. That was all I would need. And as we stepped into the waiting car, I already knew. Friday wouldn't be his victory. It would be his collapse. The car ride back to the penthouse was thick with silence. Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows, neon lights, late-night traffic, reflections of a city that never stopped moving. Ethan scrolled through his phone, jaw tight, replaying the evening in his mind. I watched the skyline instead. You smile too much at Henry, he said finally, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. It looked desperate. I kept my tone soft. I was being polite. It looked like you were trying to impress him. I'm sorry, darling. I'll do better. He exhaled hard through his nose. There won't be a next time if you keep embarrassing me. Embarrassing him? The irony almost made me laugh. The man who had just called me an idiot in fluent cruelty assumed I was too stupid to understand. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, but instead of darkness and quiet, light spilled everywhere. Music pulsed, laughter echoed. Surprise! Sophia shrieked. Ethan blinked, then broke into a grin. What is this? His sister was draped across my custom Italian sofa, heels kicked off, champagne flute in hand. My vintage Dom Perignon, the one I had been saving. Marcus Reed stood near the bar, already pouring another drink. Polished, calm, always calculating. Deals in the bag. Sophia sang, jumping up to hug her brother. I told you this was your year. Marcus lifted his glass. Final restructuring tomorrow. Signatures by Friday night. After that, smooth sailing. Restructuring. I slipped off my heels slowly, placing them by the door. My gaze drifted casually around the room. And then I saw it. A manila folder on the coffee table. Asset liquidation. E. and L. Carter. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I moved toward the table, forcing a bright smile. Champagne for me too? Sophia waved a hand dismissively. Help yourself, sweetie. Sweetie. I leaned down as if reaching for a glass. My phone slipped from my clutch into my palm. One silent click. Perfect angle. Back straight. Smile intact. Ethan, Marcus was saying, once the trust is activated, everything transfers clean. Offshore protections are airtight. Ethan laughed. Good. I don't want loose ends. Loose ends. I excused myself quietly and walked to the bathroom. Closed the door. Locked it. My hands were steady as I zoomed in on the photo. Shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Secondary mortgage on the penthouse. $500,000. My signature at the bottom. Except it wasn't mine. The loops were wrong. The pressure uneven. Forged. Notary. Marcus Reed. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They weren't just planning to leave me with nothing. They were building a case. Fraud, asset concealment, financial misconduct, with my name attached. If the deal closed Friday, I would be legally tied to every transfer. I stared at my own fake signature for a long moment. Then I smiled, softly. In the living room, Sophia's laughter rang out again. Ethan's voice followed, confident, triumphant, careless. They thought this was a celebration. They thought I was trapped. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped back into the light, face calm, eyes warm. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked casually. I met his gaze. "Perfect," I said, because now I understood. This wasn't just betrayal, this was war, and they had just handed me the first piece of evidence. I waited until the music outside swelled again before locking the bathroom door. The mirror reflected a woman who looked calm, composed, almost bored. Inside, everything was sharpening. I pulled up Arthur Kane's number. 2 years ago, I had ghostwritten his memoir after he exposed corruption inside his own firm. Forensic accountant, obsessive, brilliant. A man who could dismantle financial lies like clockwork. He answered on the second ring. "Kane." "Arthur, it's Lynn." A bit of recognition. Well, that usually means someone powerful is about to regret something. "Emergency," I said quietly. "Friday deadline." His voice changed instantly, focused, alert. "Talk." "Shell company in the Caymans. Forced second mortgage with my signature. My brother-in-law notarized it. And there's something bigger. Data inconsistencies in my husband's company. Cross-border transfers. Possibly illegal acquisition." Silence on the line. Then, "Send everything you have." "They're closing a deal Friday night," I added. "Once it's signed, assets move offshore." "I'll start digging now," Arthur said. "If there's smoke, I'll find the fire." "There's fire," I whispered. I ended the call and returned to the party. Sophia was dancing barefoot in my living room. Marcus and Ethan clinked glasses like victors already celebrating. I smiled at all of them. The next morning, Ethan left at dawn. "I've got investor calls," he muttered, knotting his tie. "Don't touch the office. I need everything exactly where it is." "Of course," I said. The door shut. I waited exactly 10 seconds before walking into his office. His laptop sat open on the desk. Careless. We shared a home network. We shared devices. We shared far more than he realized. I mirrored his system quietly, fingers moving with calm precision. Password hint. First dollar. The date printed in gold on the framed bill above his desk. Pathetic. The screen unlocked. My stomach didn't drop. It hardened. Browser history. Online gambling platforms. Losses totaling $250,000 in 6 months. Emails marked confidential. Raw data extraction protocols from his so-called privacy first apps. User medical histories. Social security numbers. Real-time location tracking. 4 million individual records compiled into compressed files. Sold to Laurent Group for AI training integration. No consent, no encryption safeguards, no algorithmic innovation, just stolen lives packaged as product. I scrolled further. Corporate filings, officer structure revisions, my name listed as joint company officer, authorization signatures attached to data transfer approvals. If the deal finalized Friday, those signatures would become binding. My pulse slowed to something dangerously steady. He wasn't just divorcing me. He wasn't just bankrupting me. He was positioning me as co-conspirator. Federal fraud, international data trafficking, financial misconduct. He was building a prison cell with my name engraved on the door. I leaned back in his leather chair and looked around the office. Framed magazine covers. Awards. Photos of us smiling at charity galas. All of it staged. My phone buzzed. Arthur. "Lynn," he said without greeting. "You were right. It's bigger than you think." "How big?" "Big enough that if this closes Friday, it won't just be divorce court." My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen. "How much time do we have?" I asked. Arthur's answer was quiet. 72 hours. 3 days. And now, the stakes weren't just personal, they were criminal. I texted Marcus at 10 the next morning. "Lunch? Need to understand the trust papers. My treat." He replied in less than a minute. "Of course, always happy to educate family." Family. We met at Capital Grill. Dark wood, leather boots, the quiet confidence of a place where deals are sealed between appetizers and dessert. Marcus arrived 5 minutes late, perfectly tailored suit, silver watch catching the light. He kissed the air near my cheek as he slid into the booth. "Lynn," he said warmly, "you look stressed." I smiled softly. "Just trying to keep up with you, financial geniuses." He ordered the Scots before I even opened the menu. So, I began lightly, unfolding a copy of the trust document I'd printed. "The LLC protects the penthouse, right? That's what Ethan said. Exactly, Marcus replied smoothly. It shields assets from potential lawsuits. Standard protection strategy. Lie. His eyes didn't blink when he said it. He had practiced that tone. I traced a finger along the page. And transferring everything offshore, that's normal? Very, he said, sipping his drink. High net worth planning. I let a small crease form between my brows. I just worry about exposure, especially with all this talk about ethical AI. Nexus Corp launches next week, right? Wouldn't that complicate Ethan's deal? His hand stopped me there, just slightly. Where did you hear that? He asked. News, I shrugged. Something about transparent data sourcing. Sounds trendy. Marcus forced a chuckle. Nexus is irrelevant. Their CEO's a has-been. Investors don't trust him. I had his gaze a second too long. 2 years ago, that has-been CEO had been drowning in scandal. An internal data leak nearly destroyed his career. His board wanted him gone. His public apology draft was a disaster. I rewrote it in one night. I shaped the narrative, reframed the accountability, rebuilt his public image line by line. Victor Lang didn't just recover, he came back stronger. And he never forgot who handed him the script. Marcus leaned back, relaxed again. Trust me, Lynn, after Friday, Ethan's untouchable. Untouchable? I smiled gently. That's comforting. We finished lunch with polite conversation. He paid the bill despite my offer. Control, always. As I walked back to my car, my phone felt heavier in my hand. That evening, I sat alone in the penthouse office. Ethan was out, late strategy session. I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. It rang twice. Victor Lang. His voice was deeper than I remembered. Steadier. Victor, I said calmly. It's Ling Nguyen. A pause. Then a low, surprised laugh. Well, I was wondering when you'd resurface. Retirement not treating you well? I'm not retired, I said. I've just been observing. Dangerous habit. I have a proposal, I continued. How would you like Ethan Carter's client list, server access, and market share after I burn him? Silence stretched between us. When Victor spoke again, his tone had changed. Tell me everything. I looked out at the Manhattan skyline, lights flickering like distant signals. I will, I said quietly, and by Friday night, the tech world is going to need a new headline. Victor didn't waste time. By Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar international number. This is Camille Laurent, assistant to Monsieur Duval. He would like a discreet conversation. Today, if possible. Discreet? I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Of course. We met in a private lounge at a midtown hotel. Henry Duval arrived alone. No entourage, no theatrics. Just that same still, measuring gaze. You understand, he said calmly in French, that what you are alleging could dismantle a very large transaction. I understand, I replied evenly. And I also understand the liability of acquiring 4 million stolen medical records. His eyes sharpened. You have proof? I have access, I said, and I have something more valuable. And what is that, Mademoiselle Nguyen? Motivation. A flicker of something, with speck perhaps, passed across his face. Friday night, he said, the contract signing will be public, highly visible. I'm aware. If you are wrong, he added quietly, you will destroy yourself alongside him. I held his gaze. My life was never his to destroy. Henry studied me another moment, then nodded once. Very well. That night, Ethan came home past midnight. He smelled like whiskey and a woman who wasn't me. You're not coming to the gala tomorrow, he announced, tossing his keys onto the marble counter. It's high level, strategic. You wouldn't be comfortable. I folded the silk blouse carefully before answering. Oh? Sophia's going instead. She knows how to present herself. On cue, Sophia's voice floated from our bedroom. Oh my god, Ethan, this closet is insane. I stepped into the doorway. She was standing in front of my garment rack, holding my black Chanel gown against her body. The one I had bought in Paris after landing my first 6-figure contract. That one's mine now, she declared brightly. I moved forward instinctively. Don't touch it. Ethan stepped between us. Don't be dramatic, Lynn, he said flatly. It's wasted on you. Wasted? Sophia laughed. Relax, I'll make it look good. I looked at the dress, then at her, then at Ethan. Fine, I said quietly. Sophia beamed, already unzipping the garment bag. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that earlier that afternoon, while they were celebrating their victory, I had opened her jewelry case. The diamond set she planned to wear tomorrow night, now flawless replicas. The originals rested safely in my private safe deposit box. Sophia twirled in front of the mirror, admiring herself. I can't wait to see Henry's face. Ethan smirked. By the end of tomorrow, we'll be unstoppable. Unstoppable. I watched the reflections side by side in the mirror. So certain, So careless. Ethan turned to me. Stay home. Order takeout. Try not to embarrass me. I smiled softly. Of course. But as I closed the bedroom door behind me, my phone vibrated again. A message from Camille. Monsieur Duval confirms your seat at the gala. VIP table. Front row. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. They thought I wasn't invited. They thought I wasn't prepared. Tomorrow night, under chandeliers and cameras, they were going to learn the difference between exclusion and strategy. Friday morning arrived with sunlight pouring through the penthouse windows like nothing in the world was about to shatter. Ethan was already pacing. Where are my blue shirts? He snapped from the bedroom. The Italian ones. In the dry cleaning bag, I answered calmly from the kitchen. They're not here. A hanger clattered to the floor. I walked toward the doorway slowly, phone already recording in my palm. He stood there in his undershirt, face flushed, eyes wild, not with panic, but with entitlement. You can't even manage basic things, he barked. What exactly do you do all day? I said nothing. He stepped closer. You drag me down, Lynn. Do you understand that? You make me look small. Small. The irony almost burned. After a beat, he leaned in, voice low and venomous. After tonight, you're gone. I'll file first thing Monday. The trust activates, assets move, and you walk away with nothing. No house, no money, nothing. You'll be lucky if you're not investigated. He smiled then. Cruel. Certain. Homeless, he added softly. Pathetic. The word lingered between us. My thumb hovered over the screen, ensuring the recording was still running. He turned away, pulling on his jacket. Stay out of my way tonight. The door slammed behind him. Silence returned. I stood in the center of the living room for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of the city below. Then I pressed save. The recording captured everything. Threats, financial coercion, intimidation. Not emotion. Evidence. By noon, I was seated in a quiet downtown office, across from a composed woman in a navy suit. I'm not seeking drama, I said evenly. I'm seeking protection. She reviewed the audio through headphones, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly. This constitutes financial abuse and verbal threats, she said. Given the circumstances, a temporary restraining order is reasonable. I signed the paperwork without shaking. No theatrics, no tears, just documentation. At exactly 5 p.m., I walked into the plaza's palm court. Arthur Kane was already there, seated with a leather briefcase beside him. He looked up as I approached. You look calm, he observed. I am. He slid the briefcase across the table and opened it. Inside was a bound report, thick and methodical. Tabs dividing sections, cross-reference transfers, email trails, gambling debts, data logs. Every transaction traced, Arthur said. Every force filing flagged. Your name appears, but only where it was forged or manipulated. I've documented the inconsistencies. I flipped through the pages, steady. And? I asked. Arthur held my gaze. You're clean, he said. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding slipped out slowly. He's not. Outside, preparations for the gala were already underway. Cameras, valets, floral arrangements. Arthur closed the briefcase gently. Once this goes public, he said, there's no turning back. I looked toward the grand staircase of the plaza, where chandeliers shimmered in anticipation. There was never anything to go back to, I replied. In 3 hours, Ethan would raise a glass to his future, and in front of the same crowd, I would press play. I chose crimson, not black, not white, not something safe or apologetic. Crimson silk, cut low across the back, tailored in Paris the year I learned how to negotiate contracts without raising my voice. The fabric skimmed my body like liquid confidence. Power didn't always need armor. Sometimes it needed exposure. My hair fell in a sharp bob, sleek against my jawline, my lips, blood red, deliberate, controlled. I didn't look like a wife, I looked like a reckoning. The VIP table cost $15,000, front row, unavoidable. When I stepped into the plaza ballroom, chandeliers blazing overhead, the room hummed with curated laughter and camera flashes. Investors, journalists, tech elites, and at the center of it all, Ethan Carter. Perfect tuxedo, perfect smile, champagne lifted high beside Henry Duval, already addressing a cluster of executives. Sophia stood near him in my black Chanel gown, posture exaggerated, diamonds sparkling dramatically under the lights. Fake diamonds. I began my descent down the grand staircase slowly, one step, then another. The silk followed like fire. Conversations softened, heads turned. I felt the shift ripple through the room, the subtle recalibration when someone unexpected enters. Ethan was mid-laugh when he saw me. The sound died in his throat. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The room stilled. Henry's eyes followed Ethan's line of sight until they found me. Recognition flickered there. Ethan moved fast, crossing the floor before anyone could react. His grip closed around my wrist, tight enough to bruise. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "I told you to stay home." His breath smelled faintly of mint and panic. I looked down at his hand on my skin, then back into his eyes. Carl. I pulled my arm free with controlled precision. Touch me again, I said evenly, and the soul charges joined the fraud list. For a split second, he didn't understand. Fraud list? His jaw tightened. You're making a scene. No, I corrected softly. You are. Sophia approached, eyes narrowed. Lynn, you're embarrassing yourself. Am I? I asked gently, my gaze drifting to the diamonds at her throat. They suit you. She smiled smugly, unaware. Ethan leaned closer, voice low and threatening. Leave. Now, before security escorts you out. I glanced past him toward my table, my name displayed clearly on the place card. VIP. Front row. Security? I echoed.
Henry Duval stepped forward then, composed as ever. Mademoiselle Nguyen, he said carefully. I wasn't aware you would be attending. I turned to him fully. Bonsoir, Monsieur Duval. Perfect French. Fluent, fluid, unmistakable. Ethan's face drained of color. You, he breathed. The room leaned in. I met Henry's eyes steadily. I believe we have something important to discuss. And for the first time that night, Ethan looked afraid. Henry stepped forward, his presence commanding the space without effort. Mademoiselle Nguyen? He asked, measured, cautious. Every eye in the ballroom shifted between us. I turned to him fully, letting the silence stretch just long enough to settle into discomfort. Then I spoke. Bonsoir, Monsieur Duval. J'espère que vous avez eu le temps de consulter mon analyse complète du projet Omega. Good evening, Monsieur Duval. I trust you've had time to review my full analysis of Project Omega. My accent was clean, Parisian, precise. A ripple passed through the crowd. Ethan physically staggered back, as if someone had struck him. You... His voice cracked. You speak French? I didn't look at him. I spent 4 years studying and working in Paris, I continued smoothly. Long enough to recognize risk when I see it. Henry's gaze sharpened. Your analysis was... thorough. It needed to be. I bent down calmly and lifted my briefcase onto the nearest cocktail table. The metal clasps clicked open with a soft, decisive sound that echoed louder than it should have. Inside, binders, tabbed and labeled. I pulled the first one free. $250,000, I said clearly, switching back to English so the entire room could understand. In gambling losses siphoned from company funds over 6 months. Murmurs. Ethan's face went red. That's a lie. I placed a stack of printed bank transfers onto the table in front of Henry. The second binder opened. 4-second mortgage on our penthouse. $500,000. My signature falsified. I lifted the page and held it up. Notary stamp. Marcus Reed. Across the room, Marcus went pale. Sophia's smile faltered. The third binder landed with deliberate force. 4 million medical records harvested without consent. Social security numbers. Health histories. Location tracking. I let the words breathe. Sold for AI training under the guise of ethical innovation. Henry's expression shifted, not shock, but cold fury. Ethan lunged toward me. You manipulative. 2 security guards intercepted him before he could reach me. This is insane, he shouted, struggling. She's unstable. She's jealous. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. Actually, I said quietly, I brought something more reliable than jealousy. I pressed play. The recording crackled through the ballroom speakers, amplified and unmistakable. Ethan's voice, clear, arrogant. Henry's a sucker, old dinosaur. Once he signs, we vanish to the Caymans. He can explain stolen data to EU regulators. A collective intake of breath, the sound of a glass being set down too quickly. Silence fell like a blade. Ethan stopped fighting. For the first time, he looked not angry, but cornered. Henry didn't raise his voice. He simply reached for the contract folder resting on the table beside him and tore it cleanly in half. The paper split with a sound sharper than any shout. The deal dies here, Henry said coldly. And just like that, Ethan Carter's empire began to collapse. Henry didn't hesitate. The contract tore cleanly in half beneath his steady hands. The sound was quiet, but in that ballroom it echoed like a gunshot. The deal dies here, he said, his voice level, controlled, final. 100 eyes shifted from him to Ethan. For the first time that night, Ethan had nothing prepared. No charm, no pitch, no narrative to spin. This is a misunderstanding, he insisted, shaking his head. She's manipulating the data. She's always been unstable, Henry raised one hand. Call the police, he instructed security. The words landed heavy. Marcus took a step back, color draining from his face. Henry, let's not be impulsive. We can review. You notarized the forged document, Henry replied coldly. There will be nothing impulsive about this. Sophia's composure cracked completely. Ethan, say something. Tell them it's not true. Ethan turned toward me instead, his face twisted, not with guilt, but fury. "You ruined me," he shouted as two uniformed officers entered the ballroom. "You vindictive, ungrateful." The officers moved efficiently, gripping his arms. Guests pulled out phones, whispers swelled. I stepped forward slowly, stopping just close enough for him to hear me over the chaos. "You already tried to ruin me," I said quietly. He struggled against the officers, eyes blazing. "You think this makes you powerful?" I met his gaze without flinching. "You failed," I replied. They dragged him backward across the marble floor, tuxedo wrinkling, hair disheveled, the image of polished success unraveling in real time. Sophia burst into tears, mascara streaking down her face. "I didn't know, I swear, I didn't know." I looked at her diamond necklace glinting under the chandelier. "Yes," I said evenly, "you did." Marcus stood frozen, calculating his next move. There wasn't one. As the ballroom doors closed behind Ethan and the flashing red lights outside reflected against the glass, a strange stillness settled. Henry turned to me. "You have just detonated a bomb in my industry," he said softly. I held his gaze. "He planted it," I answered. "I only lit the match." Part 11. Aftermath. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Tech CEO arrested for data trafficking. Privacy startup exposed in international fraud scheme. Financial news network ran the story on loop. Legal analysts dissected the offshore transfers. Cybersecurity experts condemned the data theft. Ethan's face, once featured on magazine covers, now appeared beneath the word indicted. Arthur's report had been forwarded to federal authorities before midnight. Victor moved swiftly, positioning Nexus Corp as the ethical alternative. Within 48 hours, Victor legally acquired key portions of Ethan's collapsing infrastructure through court-supervised asset liquidation. Clean, transparent, strategic. The penthouse didn't survive the fallout. With the second mortgage exposed and gambling debts verified, foreclosure proceedings began almost immediately. I packed only what belonged to me. Clothes I had purchased with my own contracts. Jewelry with receipts in my name. Documents from my separate accounts. My premarital trust remained untouched. Untouchable. Sophia called 13 times in one afternoon. I blocked her on the 14th. Marcus's firm released a brief statement about internal review. 2 days later, the state bar suspended his license pending investigation. And Ethan? Federal indictment on multiple counts. Wire fraud, identity theft, international data trafficking. Maximum sentence, 20 years. I watched the press conference from a quiet hotel suite, volume low. He looked smaller on screen, not physically, diminished. When the reporter asked if he had a statement, he glanced over the cameras as if searching for something, someone to blame. He didn't find me, because I wasn't beside him anymore. For the first time since the night at Le Bernardin, I allowed myself to exhale fully. This wasn't revenge for humiliation, it was survival. And somewhere across the Atlantic, in an office overlooking Paris, Henri Duval was preparing a new contract, one with my name on it. And this time, I would not be decorative. 3 months later, I was back where I had first learned how to sharpen silence into strategy. Paris in early spring smelled like rain and stone. The sand moved slowly beneath pale sunlight, as if nothing dramatic had ever happened anywhere in the world. Henri Duval's office overlooked Avenue Montaigne. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean architectural lines, no clutter, no excess. Power distilled. I stood across from his desk, the contract resting between us. Chief Strategy Officer, Laurent Group. Not consultant, not advisor. Chief. Henri removed his glasses and studied me the way he had the first night at dinner. Quiet, evaluating, patient. "You understand," he said, "this position will place you in rooms where very few women are invited." "I've been in those rooms before," I replied. "Yes," he said, "but not with authority." There was no arrogance in his tone, only fact. I ran my fingers lightly over the final page of the contract. My name was printed clearly beneath the title. Lin Nguyen. No Carter, no attachment. Henri leaned back slightly. "You dismantled your husband's operation in 72 hours. You coordinated forensic accounting, corporate acquisition, and public exposure with surgical precision." He paused. "You planned this flawlessly." I met his gaze. Outside, the city I once called home stretched endlessly. Rooftops, balconies, distant church bells. "No," I said softly. "I survived." For a moment, something almost gentle flickered in his eyes. He nodded once. "Sometimes," he said, "that is the same thing." I picked up the pen. The ink flowed smoothly across the page. Lin Nguyen. As I signed, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger fading, not triumph rising. Stability. The door opened quietly as Camille entered to collect the documents. "Bienvenue, Madame Nguyen," she said with a small smile. "Welcome." This time, I wasn't the girl practicing pronunciation in a cramped apartment. I was walking in through the front door. It arrived on a great Tuesday morning. Subject line: settlement proposal. I was seated at a corner table at Café de Flore, sunlight touching the rim of my wineglass.
The hum of French conversation around me felt like a familiar melody. I opened the email calmly. From Public Defender's Office. Attached was a formal demand. In light of marital assets and potential spousal entitlements, Mr. Carter seeks equitable distribution. Half. I read the line twice, not because I was shocked, but because I wanted to savor the audacity. Even now, even indicted, even facing federal charges, he still believed he could claim ownership. I took a slow sip of Sancerre and leaned back in my chair. Then I opened my camera. The photo was simple. Me, seated at Café de Flore. Paris skyline blurred behind me. Glass raised slightly. I attached it to the reply. Caption, Swiss Trust, Premarital, Untouchable, Bon Chance. I hesitated only a second before pressing send. Across the ocean, in a federal detention facility, he would read that message. He would finally understand that the assets he tried to strip from me were never his. That the woman he called decorative had always been insulated, protected, prepared. My phone remained silent after that. No counteroffer, no threats, no further emails. I lowered my sunglasses and watched tourists take photos of the cafe sign. Once, I had come here as a student with barely enough money for coffee. Now, I sat here as Chief Strategy Officer of Laurent Group. Free. And for the first time in a long time, completely untouchable. The evening air along the Seine carried the faint scent of rain and old stone. Henri and I stood on the terrace of a private reception overlooking the river. Below us, the water reflected the city lights in fractured gold. Boats drifted slowly past, their wake soft against the embankment. Paris at night had once felt like possibility. Now it felt like perspective. Henri rested his hands lightly on the railing, watching the current move.
You've adapted quickly, he said. Most people would still be rebuilding.
I rebuilt a long time ago, I replied. He turned his head slightly toward me. May I ask you something personal? I considered it for a moment, then nodded. Did you ever love him? The question settled between us without accusation. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I watched the couple walking along the riverbank below, their shoulders brushing gently. Yes, I said finally, I did. Henry remained silent. But I loved who I thought he was, I continued. I loved his ambition, his confidence, the way he spoke about the future like it was something he could shape. And when did that change? When I realized his ambition required someone smaller standing beside him. The wind lifted a strand of my hair across my cheek. I didn't brush it away. And now, Henry asked quietly. I let the question travel through me. Now, no penthouse, no shared surname, no carefully curated illusion of marriage, just clarity. I love who I am, I said. The words didn't feel defiant. They felt steady. Henry studied me for a long moment, then gave a small nod of understanding. Good, he said. That is far more dangerous. I smiled faintly. Paris no longer felt like a city I had escaped to in order to survive. It felt like a place I had returned to because I chose it. Not refuge. Home. The Laurent Winter Gala was smaller than the Manhattan spectacle, but more powerful. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished floors. CEOs, diplomats, cultural icons, every conversation precise, every smile intentional. I moved through the room in midnight blue this time. Not crimson, not fire. Confidence didn't need flames anymore. As I passed the cluster of guests near the bar, I heard the whisper. That's her. A pause. The woman who destroyed her husband. The words weren't cruel. They were fascinated. I slowed, just slightly, but didn't turn. Harry appeared at my side as if summoned by instinct.
They're not entirely wrong, he murmured softly. I glanced at him. No? You did destroy him. I met his eyes. I exposed him, I corrected. Henry's lips curved faintly. He picked up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray and handed one to me. To dangerous women, he said quietly. I lifted my glass. To integrity. The crystal touched with a soft, deliberate chime. Across the room, conversations resumed. Laughter flowed. Deals were negotiated beneath a surface of polite smiles. But no one mistook me for decoration. No one assumed silence. The city lights shimmered beyond the tall windows, stretching endlessly across Paris. I thought of Manhattan for a fleeting second. Of chandeliers and shattered glass. Of a man who believed language was power only when he held it. Ethan Carter had once called me decorative. He had once believed I understood nothing. Now his name appeared only in legal case summaries and cautionary articles about corporate arrogance.
And me? I was no longer hiding behind a smile. No longer shrinking to make someone else feel tall. I stood exactly as I was. Visible, fluent, unafraid. Ethan Carter became a cautionary tale told in a language he never bothered to learn. And I finally spoke. The end.